Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. With the storms this afternoon has played a little havoc on our internet connection, so I apologize. Let me just share my screen again. Also, to multimodal connections. So this, some of the features of the core are traveling from the Lemoyne borough side, traveling east to west. You'll have a variety of uses, including what you see in the top a variety of residential uses that then leads into an industrial. Gettysburg Road towards Sharmanstown was where the former US 15 interchange was located. Since that interchange was relocated to the lower, a little over 17,000 average daily trips. Zoning, we are evaluating zoning, which is important. That helps determine what types of land uses in zoning or uses, if you will, Can you give me the Zoom number again, Peter?
It's phone number.
I need the attendee number. 987 or 9.
97698753 Sorry, folks, we're still having some issues with the internet. We'll be on.
Okay, so sorry about that. Been a little bit of challenge here this afternoon with the connection. So the zoning, I think we talked about that to demonstrate some of the various land uses and what's available in terms of the types of uses that we have to look at today and thinking about uses in the future. Biking and walkability, this slide just simply shows where the existing sidewalk network, so the yellow areas alignment show that those are existing sidewalks. As you can see, the corridor really lacks any real true sidewalk connectivity, and that's something we talked about a lot today, as well as bicycle amenities and potential improvements that we'll show you. We also looked at safety from some of our data analysis. There's a number of crashes that have occurred along the corridor. This data is from 2015 to 2019. There's been, unfortunately, one fatal crash. There's been 3 serious crashes, 4 pedestrian-related crashes. The areas shown in red are where most of those crashes occur. As you can see, they occur at the major intersections along the corridor, the 18th Street and 17th Street on the east, Carlisle Road, Hartsdale Drive, Gettysburg Road, where it actually is the old US 15 route, and there Lower Allen Drive, just across from the AMC Theater shopping complex. We also, preceding this workshop today, we interviewed a number of business owners and property owners along the corridor. We had good conversations with them to get inputs and ideas on the study. And also, too, we have an online public survey that's still available. So far, we have 670 responses, which is a tremendous response. And then, of course, yesterday afternoon and today, we conducted our urban design workshops. Just quickly, some of the survey findings of those responses: 72% are township residents, 12% work in the corridor, and also, too, 63% of the participants visit the corridor daily, weekly, and predominantly visit and travel through the corridor by driving. We do have a number of respondents that actually walk or bike the corridor on a daily or weekly basis. And we also recognize that some of that travel is actually they're using the walking or biking as their primary mode of travel, either to work or other shopping destinations in the corridor. Also, transit is present, as we talked about. There's 13 transit users that responded to the survey to give us some good input from that perspective, if you will. So just to wrap up here, generally participants support aesthetic improvements, overall appearance of the corridor. New uses to include restaurants, retail, parks and recreation are some desired new uses in the corridor. Again, this is from the survey results. Improvements are desired to see sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, and more lighting. Generally, participants are not in favor of supporting new industrial office uses, new residential uses. And in terms of reducing traffic lanes, not generally in favor of reducing traffic lanes. And the blinking light is the emergency light out here in front of the township building along the corridor. So just, I'm going to turn it over to Peter and Kirsten. Just at the timeline, we began this project back in March. We're currently here on month 3, identifying potential improvements through this design workshop, and then we'll continue out through the month of August, which is month 6, to have a draft plan completed and ready for the Township Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners to review and accept the plan. So Peter and Kirsten, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Troy. I hope everybody can hear us. So I just very briefly wanted to just say a few words. In general, what I wanted to say is, I'm just switching over my screen here, sorry. But in general, you know, there's you know, in terms of what we were looking at and I'm going to let Kirsten actually take and go into more of the details, but you know, we looked at this area and we actually broke up the whole corridor into 3 little pieces, if you will, 3 bite-sized chunks. And one of them, of course, is all the way on the west side, which you're looking at here, where we started looking at ways that we could create more connectivity, more bike connections, once we heard more pedestrian connections, but also think about how to change the built environment. So that's one of the things that we looked at here. And of course, in that case, we looked at maybe creating almost like a town center, if you will. The center portion of it, that also includes the park and the municipal building, and Kirsten's going to walk through some of the ideas there in terms of not only the bike connection, but also east-west bike connection, but also north-south bike connection.
Can I have my phone?
Which will be very important. And then finally, the last bit, which is the easternmost portion of it, and that is where we looked at ways to be able to make, again, the same connectivity, but also ways of creating an amenity under the current highway there, rather than what's happening there right now, which is just basically parking spaces. And so for that, I'm going to just hand it off to Kirsten very quickly so she could start sharing some of our ideas, and we could jump on that real quickly. Kirsten.
Thank you, Peter. I should have my screen coming up here in just a sec for everyone to be able to see. And we are going to walk you through some of the things that we talked about today. Just wait a second for things to load here. So as Peter was mentioning, we had 3 different design sessions today, and we looked at 3 different areas along the corridor so that we can dive into, a few blocks at a time in more detail. And this western segment of the corridor is the first area we looked at this morning. Here you've got to the north, you've got the township boundary, you have a large shopping area with the AMC Theater and the Aldi grocery store. On the Lower Allen Township side, you have the school with playing fields, and you have a series of businesses that are already present, that are well established, and a lot of changes that have come in recent years on the Bonton site. And we looked at this whole series of spaces, and I'm going to show a number of things that we talked about all kind of coming together. We talked about bike connectivity along Simpson Ferry Road with a 2-lane bi-directional bike lane, but then also having connectivity and sidewalk improvements along Gettysburg Road. And then thinking about how this space could entirely change. We are thinking not just short term, but long term, what is the vision for what the corridor can be and what kinds of policies can help that move along. We talked about the potential for more development to come into this area, for more mixed use, for more shopping and retail destinations, and also housing to go along with it, workforce and attainable housing for the workers. So I'm going to turn on what that kind of looked like. And you see that sort of lime green or light green, may look yellow on your screens, line shows the bike connectivity along Simpson Ferry Road. And then you can see just the potential, and we are thinking really big, really high level here, but the potential for the hotel that's already planned, and then potentially other new development to come in over the years and fill out this space and really make it more of a walkable town center kind of area. With Gettysburg Road being a central spine through that area with nice streetscaping and a cross-block pedestrian crossing, which would be kind of hidden by that hotel, but we'll take a closer look in another minute. And then bike pedestrian connectivity through that larger block as well. And then up at the corner, I'm going to zoom in here, this area around the highway, this is PennDOT owned land, and there is also interest and talks about making this more of a stormwater amenity, including retention ponds, potentially on both sides of the highway, using both of those green spaces. And then there was some interesting conversation and interest from the community in not just doing a retention pond, but echoing some of the investments that have been made in the park next to the township's building, to do more best practices for ecological design and riparian types of native plantings, and sort of best practices, and have some educational factors embedded in really nice environmentally friendly design that uses the stormwater management systems and incorporates low impact landscaping design and makes those attractive, nice spaces along the street and along the sidewalks for pedestrians to walk by and enjoy the ecological landscape setting. That also, you can kind of zoom in here, that little bit of purple on the underpass indicates an opportunity to also make kind of a gateway, incorporate some lighting and some public art perhaps, so that as you get to this area, you feel that you've arrived at a place, you know where you are, there's a sense of identity, there's not only just the buildings are being shown closer to the street than the current urban form is, and we're thinking big scale, we're thinking, showing how this could change over the years and could change in the future, but as the area does change, we're showing buildings coming up closer to the street, to again, make a more walkable environment, and make better use of all of that land. The current configuration of Simpson Ferry Road is 5 lanes, but then also really massive setbacks. So the buildings on opposite sides of the street are very far apart. And what we're showing here is bringing those buildings much closer to the street. You kind of toggle that on and off to see the change between the large setbacks and then buildings closer to the street. So you have the opportunity to start with this nice park space and ecological space over by the overpass, and then have we've also removed the right turn slip lane and cleaned up this intersection to have a more straightforward intersection that's safer for pedestrians and for bicyclists crossing the street, and keeps traffic. It encourages traffic to go a bit slower through this portion of Gettysburg Road because they are making a more intentional right angle turn when they get into the main road there at Simpson Ferry. So again, if you want a walkable environment and a mixed use environment with businesses and residences in the area, we want to encourage traffic to go a little bit slower through here. And then we have the opportunities to do a nice streetscape on Gettysburg Road, as well as those bike improvements on Simpson Ferry. So that's kind of the big picture of how these pieces come together. And I'm going to go and turn on a few other images that we looked at that go into a few of the details. So this here is, let me turn that on again. There we go. This here is the intersection of Simpson Ferry Road and Lower Allen Township Road. So you've got over to the left, that bottom left corner would be the AMC Theater. The very, very bottom right corner, just almost off the screen, is the high school. Now we're looking east through the township here as we look up the screen. And we looked at how would the bike and pedestrian improvements look at this intersection. So if we just drop in some of those larger buildings, again, as the area redevelops, bringing buildings closer to the street, bringing some more mixed use development with commercial on the ground floor and potentially residential uses above. And then having the consistent bi-directional bike lane go through this whole area with clearly demarcated crossings for both pedestrians and for the bicyclists. And you can see even on Lower Allen Township Road, going into this intersection, we looked at the possibility of narrowing down the road a bit to also, give a little bit more space for pedestrians, make that crossing shorter for people to cross, and slow down traffic as they go through that intersection. We've also narrowed, or we've tightened up the turning radiuses a bit from the current, very wide turning radiuses that allow you to make very fast turns. By narrowing those up a little bit, it makes the crossing for pedestrians a bit shorter, and it makes everyone make those turns at a slightly lower speed. So this is a traffic calming device. And then the other detail we wanted to dive into here is that streetscape along Gettysburg Road. Once the hotel goes in on the right and potential new development or redevelopment over time on the left, with buildings being brought closer to the street. We did a little thinking of what that would look like and what a mid-block crossing would look like at that point to make sure that it's very easy for pedestrians to connect from the hotel to mixed use and retail and restaurant uses on the other side of the block. So those are some of the things that we talked about at the at the western edge of the site. And then in the afternoon, we dove into trying to carry on some of those ideas into the, oh, actually, there's one more I want to share. Let's stay in the west for one more image. We looked at what this would look like, what some of these street improvements would look like on Simpson Ferry / Gettysburg Road, right after they merge and as they go into this, as they go under the highway. So here you have a 5-lane road. You have 2 through lanes in each direction, and then a central shared turn lane that continues throughout the corridor, more or less. Those bidirectional turn lanes are conflict zones. They cause a lot of issues in general. And so we did look at this throughout each of the 3 quadrants, or each of the 3 areas, and tried to figure out how we could make those a bit safer. And then we looked at where the sidewalks are discontinuous. Here, obviously, we do have a sidewalk that goes under the overpass and then ends. And then also we looked at using that wide shoulder for the bidirectional bike lane. And we measured the street at this location. We have 12-foot lanes, which is a little wider than they need to be. So we also have the opportunity to narrow the driving lanes a little bit and gain some additional space in the shoulder on both sides, which then allows that additional space to be repurposed for nice wide bike lanes, for sidewalks, and for even some buffers to protect people on the sidewalk and in the bike lane from the driving lanes. So here's a look at how that lays into this area. You can see the bright green bidirectional bike lane, a small narrow buffer zone that could be planted or could be a low curb. We also talked about flex posts. So there are a few options for how that bike lane can be separated from the driving lanes. There is some space to do that. On the other side, we can widen the sidewalk, or we can also incorporate some buffer between the sidewalk and the driving lanes so that pedestrians are a bit more protected. And then add more trees. That's something that we heard was desired along the corridor. And in this space, especially, we see a lot of fairly unmaintained green area right now. This does include part of that PennDOT right-of-way over on the left of the screen. It's part of the PennDOT right-of-way that's being considered for stormwater management and for some riparian plantings and native plantings to make that more of an attractive amenity that also naturally handles the stormwater. And by having those trees, that also contributes to that open space, makes it a little bit more park-like, and then provides some protection for the pedestrians and for the bicyclists, and catch shade, and makes a nice, more attractive environment. On the overpass itself, there's the opportunity to include some lighting underneath to make that feel more safe. Potentially even some art or some murals or some signage along the overpass itself or underneath or both to make that more of a gateway, to make it reflect the character and identity of the place and announce that you are here, you are entering this area, to be something that contributes to the environment around it rather than just being a blank concrete wall. And then that center non-continuous turn lane, again, we're going to get into the next section some of the ideas for how we dealt with that, but it certainly is not needed continuously as a turn lane at this point. Particularly, there is nowhere to turn, so we did think about ways to have that be closed off, whether it's with paint or whether it's curb or median. And we'll move up the corridor and look at some of the options for that. And here's one more look at the west corridor. And this one's important to not forget. There's one final idea that was discussed on the west. It was tested, the idea of doing a roundabout at the junction of Gettysburg Road and Simpson Ferry. And this is something that could also work. You can see here, again, that idea of the riparian, the stormwater management on either side with some native plantings and riparian plantings. And then right there at that major intersection, actually having a roundabout. So that's something that we can continue to look into and test to see how that would work with the traffic flow. The idea of the roundabout there, it does slow traffic. It makes it easier for people to cross the street. It reduces, or it really gets rid of the need for having turn lanes. You don't need a right turn lane and a left turn lane because those turning movements are handled by the roundabout. And for very large vehicles, a common practice is to have the outer portion of that inner circle be made of a mountable material, so that the driving lanes themselves are defined for vehicles, but for when you have very large trucks, it's still very easy for them to just simply cut over some of that mountable area if they're having if they need an extra large turning radius. That was an idea that we'll continue to explore. Some of those same ideas then get carried on through into the central district. So we'll take a look at what that meant here in the center. Our first afternoon session started to look at everything from the highway up until the Township building. We again talked about continuing that bi-directional bike lane that we just looked at over on the western side with a bit of a buffer to protect the bicyclists from the vehicular traffic. That would be continued all the way up to the Township building, and then beyond that, but we'll get into that in our third area. We also talked about how there is already a fair amount of commercial businesses that are located in this stretch of the corridor. And a lot of the properties are already zoned as mixed use. So there's desire to see this continue to evolve and for those businesses to continue to have improved access and improved streetscaping, improved walkability to support those businesses growing and new businesses coming into this area as well. So this is another location for a district, a node of commercial activity and mixed use activity, which is also supported by a lot of residential uses right around it on both the north and the south sides. These are all people that would be able to walk to these businesses, especially if getting across the street, it would also be safer and easier for them. So we looked at two different key ways of dealing with this, with the street itself. If the goal is to have more of a mixed-use node here and businesses on both sides of the street, it is important to recognize that the current configuration of the street, 5-lane road with the current speed limit is not very conducive to that kind of environment. And what you really want is to have slower speeds and a narrower road at this point. If those are the uses that you want to see, that you want to encourage in this area. So the two options that we looked at are first to keep it as a similar road configuration to what is there now. I think I actually have a few things layered on top here. Turn that off. It's maybe a bit more clear to see. To keep the current road configuration with 2 through lanes in each direction, and then a central turn lane. But just like we talked about previously, there's no need for this to be a continuous turn lane with people having conflict points, trying to use it to go two different directions. So instead, we looked at ways of turning this into a median with turn pockets at the intersections where it's needed to guide those turning movements only at the points that they're needed, and reallocate that space, close it off to traffic when it's not needed. Having those medians also gives opportunities for pedestrian refuge when they're crossing the road. That was the first option that we looked at. The second option that we looked at, and this could be something that may develop over time or be a longer range improvement, but the second option we looked at would be to actually go to a 2-lane road, 1 travel lane in each direction, and continue to have that central flexible median and turn lane as needed. But then the outer travel lane in both directions would be turned into a parking lane, parallel parking that would serve both of the that would serve all of the commercial businesses on both sides of the street. And what could happen there is you could actually do these curb bump outs at the corners so that that closes off that lane for through traffic and protects the parking in that space instead. What that does is it does substantially reduce the speed and the likelihood that people will be speeding in that area, and it also makes a much safer condition for people crossing the street. It allows buildings to be closer to the street. It makes a much more comfortable, walkable retail and mixed-use kind of environment. As well as if you do have businesses along this stretch, it gives them an opportunity to have on-street parking right in front of their businesses. As I believe Troy mentioned earlier in the initial presentation, the traffic volumes in this area have gone down since the highway on-ramp was relocated. And so one of the things that we'll be looking further into is whether this would support the current traffic volumes. But we do know that the current level of traffic volumes are supportive of a road diet, and this would be a component of a road diet. Moving up the corridor towards the Township building, we did look at continuing the bike lane, and we heard that there was interest in actually connecting a bike lane through this area. I'm going to put right in the middle of the screen there. It's Camp Hill Stormwater Connection. This green area that stretches up between the industrial buildings. There is interest in trying to get a bike connection up through there that would then connect to Camp Hill. There's also an alternate alignment that's being looked at that goes through the neighborhood and then winds back up in this direction. But in either location, the goal is to have a bike lane that goes up through this green space and then connects further up towards Camp Hill. So we looked at what would happen if you've got a green space and a bike connection going north, and then also a green space with the existing park next to the Township building, and desire for that for a future bike lane to go down to the south through that park as well. And what we realized is you have this turn in the road, which also sets up the really amazing views as you're driving along this corridor from either direction. All the views really lead you right here to this little green space, which is also the connection point between those two, the green finger that leads north and the park to the south, and the ideal place to cross the street if you've got bike lanes going in both directions from north to south. So we did we looked at a few different alternate layouts for that one particular spot. Let me go jump to showing those next. Here we have a closer view of that little green space with the park. And one of the first things that we looked at here was, again, integrating a median in the center to facilitate an easier crossing for pedestrians and for bicyclists, and turning that little green space into more of an amenity, more of a usable public space, cleaning up the access road, that little slip road serves those buildings, to make that a little bit narrower at the entrance point and have a more specific, more guided entrance, and give a little bit more protected space towards users in the middle. So that is one option. And then one of the other options that was looked at was actually closing off that smaller little slip road and giving all of that space over to a public space, which could incorporate some green and some landscaping, could also incorporate some more hardscaped plaza type space, that could serve some of those buildings and some of the adjacent buildings, especially for those that serve mixed use functions and have ground floor retail or shop fronts, and they can utilize some of that outdoor space. So this is another alternative that just turns over all of that space to public use and makes it more activated and programmable, and can incorporate some things like a little seating pavilion here. And again, in either of these configurations, there's a green median in the center that takes that turn lane that's not particularly needed at this individual spot, and uses that to help pedestrians get across the street in a safer way. Gives them a place to stop in the middle and have an island of refuge as they wait to cross traffic coming from the other direction. Right, and with that, we then moved on over to the east, the eastern portion of the corridor. And we had some pretty big ideas here. So we're going to jump right on into it. Yesterday, we did a little tour of the site, and we had an introductory session where we were sharing some screenshots and sharing some initial thoughts about some of the constraints and some of the opportunities in this area. And you can see in this photo, there's an enormous amount of space that is outside the drivable lane. It's outside the roadway. And so we started simply by highlighting the available space that is paved but not part of the driving lane. And what we noticed here under this overpass is there's quite a large amount of space on both sides of the road. In fact, this photo is taken standing from the south side of the road. There's even more over there on the north side of the road. And this underpass here is actually, it's quite light. You see quite a lot of light coming in from both sides. The pillars are quite high. There's a lot of open space. It's fairly visible. So we started to think about how these could be used, how the space could be more programmable and better connected to the uses around it. And there are other cities that have done some very successful reprogrammings of the space underneath their overpasses to incorporate things like basketball or skate parks or seating areas or game areas. So that's one of the things that came to mind here, and that we did some exploring to see how that could work. So I'm going to turn this on. Here we have, again, that bidirectional bike lane is continuing through, and the additional space around it is shown colored in as like a plaza kind of space. This could serve any number of different uses. Some of the things that were talked about were pickleball, which is enjoyed by adults, and they can then head on over to nearby restaurants to take a break and get some refreshment when they're done enjoying games. Things like table tennis and basketball were mentioned. Things like bocce ball, I believe, was mentioned at one point. Another idea that came up was actually because the space is if a lot of the programming is left fairly flexible, then this could also be an area where food trucks could come in for events or for weekend times, or it's a fairly flexible space that could be used and programmed in different ways. You can see there's some orange areas show opportunities to include things like some murals or artwork. And then we're also showing some on-street parking here. And this could continue around. We'll actually look at a different view shortly to show a little bit better how that might lay out. But there's a fair amount of space, a fair amount of shoulder that's available, so you could actually have on-street parking that would then protect the people in the space below and provide a barrier between those people and between the driving lanes. So on-street parking serves as a traffic calming tool and also a protective measure. As you get over towards the curve, of course, that goes away. because we do want to protect drivers as they go around that curve. And by actually bringing the curve out and bringing a sidewalk out all the way to where the driving lane is, you're narrowing it substantially down to where the lane is, where the lane actually is. And that all of these measures together, these all contribute to slowing down traffic, slowing down drivers, so that as they're going through this, before they even reach that curve, and certainly as they're going through it, they're going at a much slower speed, and it's very easy to see where you're going. It's really not a very sharp curve. It's fairly soft curve, but you're also going into it much slower, so it's much easier to see and anticipate what's in front of you as you go through that. And then, of course, we want a pedestrian crossing between these new activated spaces to connect from the north to the south. Chess, had it written right there. Chess was one of the other things that was mentioned that might be desired. And as we went through the conversations, we took another couple of looks at different views. This is a bit of a difficult area to see and plan because it's hidden from view underneath the overpass. So we did a lot of sketching from just different angles. But in this particular version here, again, you see those demarcated in red in front. You could have quite a lot of on-street parking in this area that would protect the people that are using this activated plaza or park space from the drivers. And we locate that specifically on the areas where the road is more straight and not right in the curve itself. And then you can see here the idea of actually hanging some nets that would separate if there's a space on the other side that has perhaps basketball or perhaps something like table tennis, that would protect movement, that would protect stray balls from bouncing out into the street. So these are all very high level concepts, but lots of ideas that were discussed for how this space could be programmed and to become more of a community amenity. And then what would that mean for some of the businesses around this area? Well, we certainly talked a lot about that too. And by having slower traffic and more community events, more activation, more programming, potential for things like food trucks and certainly activities that draw people to come and spend time in this area. This could also be something that is pursued with the cooperation of some of the local businesses. We did look at cleaning up some of the access issues in this area. There's a very large amount of unpaved or a paved area where the turning movements are fairly free flowing. There's a lot more pavement than is needed. And so we looked at the possibility of tightening up some of the access roads and turning some of the underutilized pavement and turning some of that additional space that may not be needed for car movement. And maybe reorienting where some of the parking occurs and actually bringing some of this business out closer to the street, having some outdoor dining or a front patio that gets people closer to the street and gets eyes onto the street and gets more activation out in this area. Again, if we just imagine stepping back, this is a static image, but if we imagine stepping back a bit to the other side of the underpass as you're looking down this road into Lower Allen Township, this is what you see at the end. You see, you don't really see that restaurant now because it's just set back from you. But if it were to have this front patio, that is what you see. Your vision goes straight down this way. So really improves the visibility of some of those businesses as well. And then here you can see a cross block crossing to get people from one side to the other. You can see that bumped out at the corner right in the curve. That would make sure that the road is narrowed and drivers are substantially slowed down as they approach this area. And then here's a slightly more an aerial view that kind of brings together some of these components all in one image. So let's take a look at that. So here we have that bright yellow-green bike lane, a bidirectional bike lane. You can see by reorganizing the access in and out of this site, we've gained a lot of outdoor public space, which can be used to bring some of those restaurant functions closer to the street, have some kind of outdoor seating space with some overhead lighting. Some of the parking does get reoriented a little bit, but can also be shifted more towards the back while still having some of those accessible spaces up front. These were some ideas. And then over across the way, you kind of get a better sense from this angle of really how much open space is there underneath this overpass. So there's quite a lot of space that can be utilized and programmed in different ways. And then you can see some of the on-street parking available on to the bottom of the screen as well as over towards the top of the screen. And then similar to the highway that we showed previously, this overpass also has the opportunity to incorporate some signage or some kind of public art or something up along that edge, so that as you're driving through this area, you can see something that draws the eye and something that announces the character of this place and the location, Lower Allen Township. Here you are. Right, and then I think we have just one or two final things to share. We did talk a little bit, it's a short one, but we did talk a little bit about some of the streetscape elements just through various blocks of the corridor. So we looked at some more high visibility crosswalks, especially at key, especially at some of the signalized intersections, and then the bidirectional bike lane. How that could have some separation. And here there was a lot of interest in some more lighting and some landscaping and trees, especially in the areas that have very little greenery. But we do have some constraints, especially under the utility lines on that side of the street. Those utility lines impact pretty much the entire corridor. There are some really great examples of trees and landscaping species that can be used that don't get too tall. Some of those have even already been used here at the Township building. So there was a lot of discussion about where trees would be suitable, and just making sure that as long as the right species are selected, you can incorporate some more lighting and also some more landscaping and some more trees along the corridor where there's room. And our final item here, this was the final area we looked at, and is a little quicker to wrap up here, but all the way over to the eastern edge of the site, again on the overpass, opportunities on either side to incorporate some art or some wayfinding, or incorporate the name of Lower Allen Township. We did look actually here, and this happened in some of our previous sessions. We'd shown that bike lane staying on Gettysburg Road at this location and going under the underpass. But in our final session, we also looked at an alternate alignment where it actually peels off of crosses the road and diverts a little bit sooner, and crosses under the overpass at this location before the curve in the road, and then follows this alley. That gets it out of the intersection that gets a little bit tighter coming up here towards 17th and 18th Streets. So that's an alternate alignment that might be a little safer for the bicyclists. And then we definitely had heard that there was a need for more accessible pedestrian crosswalks at this location and accessible curbs to get people onto those crosswalks. So having that incorporated around this intersection is also key. And what we showed here is using some of the available space to actually also introduce a median at this intersection. You have one lane headed west through the intersection at this point, and it's a very large lane. It's a very wide lane, so there's an opportunity to put that median in and then give pedestrians a refuge in the middle the intersection to help them get across. And I think that is the very quick and the very high-level recap of the many, many ideas that we heard today. We had really fantastic participation from people in all 3 sessions. Some of you who were able to join us for all 3 of those. We had participation online and participation here in person. Again, heard a lot of ideas and have taken a lot of those down in notes and in sketches, and have shown you as many as we could this evening in this wrap up. And we will go back and try to bring them all together, and look forward to sharing the next phase of this coming in a little bit. I'll let Troy give the closing comments.
Okay, thanks everybody. As we said before, our next steps are to prepare a draft, all this together in a draft master plan. That'll be presented to the Planning Commission later in the summer. I know this weekend will be the start of summer, kind of the unofficial start of summer, but towards the end of August timeframe, we should have a draft document that we'll be presenting to the Planning Commission. Obviously, that will be available for the public's review, put on the Township website, and then once the Planning Commission and others have input on that, then we'll take it to the Township Board of Commissioners. And then the hope would be that commissioners would adopt the plan, accept the plan, and that's really the hard work starts to begin implementing some of the ideas. So that document is going to further vet out some of the concepts. We're going to actually take those back to our office at Michael Baker International. We're going to have our traffic design engineers, other experts do some further evaluation to test the ideas to make sure they align with PennDOT design standards, because we are working on PennDOT roadways, so we need to make sure that we're appropriate for what they would find acceptable. Also, from a land use standpoint, obviously some of the design concepts show some big ideas, big vision, but you have to think big to think about long-term improvements and changes over time. So we would anticipate that if there's some investment made, just like the township's working on the former Bonton property, some transformation going on there, other types of physical improvements like we saw bicycle lanes, sidewalks, those types of investments made over time, hopefully would start to facilitate some of the ideas and concepts. So again, this is a vision for the future. It tries to show collectively how that corridor could be reimagined, how we could improve safety for bicyclists, pedestrians, and what opportunities lie for other types of amenities throughout the corridor. So we really appreciate everybody's participation. Thanks again for your patience on some of the technology hiccups at the onset, but hopefully the storms are passed through and we'll enjoy some nice weather here this holiday weekend. Thank you, everybody, and be safe.